The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am bringing you another installment of In the Know videos for players who are just beginning to explore what this great game has to offer. This is part 4 of my tutorial about playing the Arkham Horror LCG on my virtual tabletop of choice, Octagon. In the first part of this series, we learned how to download and install Octagon, as well as the Arkham Horror LCG mod and the image packs. In part 2, we learned how to build an Arkham Horror LCG deck for Octagon using the Arkham DB or the Octagon deck builders. In part 3, we learned how to launch a solo, two-handed solo, or multiplayer game on Octagon. In this episode, we get to know the layout of the virtual tabletop and some of the most important commands and hotkeys. I'm not going to discuss every feature and hotkey available in Octagon, just the ones that I commonly use while playing the Arkham Horror LCG. The most important thing to remember is that Octagon does not enforce the rules of the Arkham Horror LCG. While it does have some helpful automation and a useful turn management tool to track the phases of the game, it won't apply bonuses or penalties to your skill value, calculate your total skill value after you pull from the Chaos Bag, or enforce the rules on treacheries, such as Dissonant Voices or Frozen in Fear. That's all on you. I have discussed several websites during this series of videos. I will leave links to them in the description down below. If you enjoy this type of content, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps out the channel a great deal. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you content like these In the Know segments. If you'd like to support the channel's goals and see your name on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Without further ado, let's discuss the layout of Octagon's virtual tabletop and some of the most important commands and hotkeys. When you successfully launch the Arkham Horror LCG on Octagon, you should see this screen. In the upper right-hand corner, there is an area reserved for the current agenda and act cards, the scenario reference card, and any chaos tokens and encounter cards that you draw from their respective decks. The area in the bottom left is reserved for the chat window. It will log all commands that you issue during the game, so if you need to check whether you added a Doom token during the Mythos phase, drew an encounter card, or pulled a token from the Chaos Bag, you can do so here. Next to the chat window are the Global and Player tabs. The windows reserved for the Chaos Bag, Agenda and Act decks, Location, Primary and Secondary Encounter decks, and Victory Display are under the Global tab. The windows for your hand, draw deck, discard pile, sideboard, basic weaknesses, and secondary decks, if any, are located under the Player tab. You may minimize and maximize these windows as necessary by clicking the arrow icons at the bottom of the window, like so. If you minimize these windows entirely, they become icons on the right-hand side of the screen. Simply click the icons in order to maximize them. Directly below the Global and Player tabs are counters for willpower, intellect, combat, agility, and your maximum hand size. When you load an investigator, Octagon will set these counters to your investigator's base skill values. Remember that Octagon does not enforce the rules of the Arkham Horror LCG, so you must adjust these counters manually if you would like to track the skill bonuses or penalties from assets or encounter cards, such as the +1 combat skill bonus from Beat Cop or the -1 willpower penalty from Dreams of Rillier. I don't use these counters all that often. Sometimes I remember to adjust them, sometimes I don't. Like I said, Octagon doesn't enforce the rules of the game, so these counters don't have any impact on actual gameplay. They are simply a useful way to keep track of your current skill values or your total skill value during a complicated skill test in which you have a lot of bonuses or penalties. The one exception is the maximum hand size counter. If you're using Octagon's turn management hotkey, F12, it will prompt you to discard down to your maximum hand size when you advance to the upkeep phase. We'll discuss Octagon's handy turn management feature more in a moment. In the upper left-hand corner of the screen are the game and option menus. The commands to load a deck that you have constructed or to load a pre-built investigator starter deck, scenario, or chaos bag are under the game menu. The hotkey to load a deck is Ctrl L. There is no hotkey to load a pre-built deck. The commands to reset or quit the virtual tabletop are also under the game menu. If you would like to adjust the appearance of the virtual tabletop, you may zoom in and out using the scroll wheel on your mouse, like so. If you hold down the spacebar, you may adjust the location of the red bar that runs across the center of the screen and the area reserved for encounter cards. For example, if you would like to move the location of the area reserved for encounter cards, say to the left-hand side of the screen, simply hold down the spacebar and drag the screen like so. Other commands to alter the appearance of the virtual tabletop are found under the Options menu. If you don't like the default background, you may change it using the Change Background option, like so. If you prefer the default settings, you may reset it under the Options menu. If you accidentally move the virtual tabletop or you're unhappy with the changes that you've made, you can reset it to its default position by clicking Reset Screen Position under the Options menu or by pressing the F10 hotkey. Commands to undock the card preview and chat windows are found under the Options menu. If you're hosting a multiplayer game, the commands to kick a player or spectator or mute spectators are also found here. Most of the screen is dedicated to the virtual tabletop, where you may drag and drop player and encounter cards once you have loaded the Investigator deck, Scenario decks, and Chaos bag. Let me give you an example. Click on the Game menu in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. Select Load Pre-Built Deck. Click on the folder labeled 01 Knight of the Zealot, select the Roland Banks starter deck, then press Open. When you load an Investigator deck using either the Load Deck or Load Pre-Built Deck commands, the Investigator and Investigator mini card will appear on the virtual tabletop and the deck will appear in the deck window. OCTGN will also draw a hand of 5 cards, which will appear in the hand window. It's important to note that if you mouse over a card, a larger preview of it will appear on either the left or right hand side of the screen, like so. You may undock this card preview under the Options menu. Once the Roland Banks starter deck has loaded on the virtual tabletop, select Load Pre-Built Deck again, click on the folder labeled 01 Knight of the Zealot, select the Midnight Masks, and press Open. When you load a scenario deck using the Load Pre-Built Deck command under the Game menu, the cards required to set up the scenario will appear on the virtual tabletop. Agenda 1A, Act 1A, and the scenario reference card will appear in the area reserved for encounter cards. OCTGN will also generate 2 cards to represent the encounter deck and special encounter deck, if any, which are located under the global tabs. These cards are signified by a plus symbol. I'll discuss the function of these cards when I discuss the table menu. The pre-built scenarios for the Arkham Horror LCG usually store cards that are placed out of play at the beginning of the scenario in either the Special Encounter deck or Second Special Encounter deck under the Global tab. For example, in the Midnight Masks scenario from the core set, the cards representing the members of the Cult of Umardotha are in the Special Encounter deck, while the Ghoul Priest, which may or may not be part of the scenario depending on how well you did during the gathering, is in the Second Special Encounter deck. If you need to drag a card from a deck to the table face down, as in the Blood on the Altar scenario from the Dunwich Legacy, drag the card onto the table while holding down the Shift key, like so. Once you have placed the card face down on the table, you may move it around as you see fit. When you're ready to flip it over, mouse over the card and press the hotkey, CTRL F. Finally, since we didn't attach a Chaos bag to the Roland Banks starter deck during deck construction, select Load Pre-Built Deck a third time. Click on the folder labeled 01 Knight of the Zealot, select Chaos Bag Standard, and press Open. When you load a Chaos bag, a small bag icon will appear next to the area reserved for the encounter cards. The bag symbol will appear whether the Chaos bag is attached to your Investigator deck or you load a Chaos bag separately. You may move the bag icon to a more convenient location on the virtual tabletop if you wish. I'll discuss the function of the bag icon when I discuss the table menu. Once you've loaded an Investigator deck, a Scenario deck, and a Chaos bag, you're ready to set up the scenario and play the Arkham Horror LCG. As I have mentioned, OCTGN's virtual tabletop does not enforce the rules of the Arkham Horror LCG as you play. However, it does have a useful turn management hotkey, F12, which you may use to advance through the game's 4 phases: Mythos, Investigation, Enemy, and Upkeep. If you press F12, the virtual tabletop will advance to the next phase of the game. Confirmation of the phase change will appear in the chat window in the lower left corner of the screen. Pressing F12 to advance to the Upkeep phase will draw a card and add a resource to your Investigator card, like so. In this example, we drew Manual Dexterity. Pressing F12 to advance to the Mythos phase will add a Doom token to the current agenda, like so. OCTGN will add a red border to the agenda card to remind you when it hits its Doom threshold and you need to advance, like so. Agenda 1A, Predator or Prey has reached its Doom threshold of 6, and OCTGN has highlighted the card with a red border. You may also advance through the phases of the game by clicking on the green arrow just above the hand window. If you use this method, the game will advance from one Mythos phase to the next Mythos phase unless you instruct the virtual tabletop to stop on a phase. You can set stops by mousing over the turn counter in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, and then highlight the phase or phases that you would like to stop, like so. As you can see, a yellow border has been placed around each phase that I have highlighted to stop. Personally, I found pressing the F12 hotkey a lot easier, and I've tried to get in the habit of using it so I don't accidentally skip the Mythos phase. The commands for the virtual tabletop are found under various menus, which are accessible by right-clicking on the table, card, or window. Most of the common commands have hotkeys. I'll post a list of the hotkeys that I often use in the description of this video. Right-clicking on the virtual tabletop brings up the table menu, which includes commands to draw encounter cards and chaos tokens, add cards to the virtual tabletop, perform tarot readings, and save the table state, among others. To draw an encounter card, you may double-click on the encounter card signified by the plus symbol in the area reserved for encounter cards, or press the hotkey CTRL E. For example, I click the card with the plus symbol, and I draw the obscuring card Treachery. To draw an encounter card from a special encounter deck in scenarios such as the Midnight Masks, you may press the CTRL SHIFT E hotkey or click the plus symbol on the appropriate deck. For example, I click the plus symbol on the Cultist deck, and I draw Ruth Turner. Encounter cards are drawn face up by default. If you want the encounter card to remain hidden, press the CTRL H or CTRL SHIFT H hotkeys, respectively. To discard the encounter card, simply mouse over the card and press delete, or drag and drop the card into the appropriate discard pile. If you need to discard a card that you drew from a special encounter deck, press Shift plus delete to ensure that it goes to the correct discard pile. For example, if I want to make sure that Ruth Turner ends up in the appropriate discard pile, I press Shift and delete, and she will end up in the second special discard pile. To draw a token from the Chaos Bag, you may click on the bag icon or press the hotkey CTRL S. For example, I click on the bag icon and I draw the 0 Chaos token. When you click on the bag icon or press the CTRL S hotkey, Octagon returns all unsealed tokens on the virtual tabletop to the Chaos Bag before it pulls another token. So while it may appear there is a token on the table, you will draw a fresh token each time. If you need to draw multiple tokens from the Chaos Bag for a card like Olive McBride, press the CTRL X hotkey and you will be prompted to specify the number of tokens to draw. For example, I press CTRL X, I will draw 3 tokens, and I draw a -4, a -3, and a skull. To draw an additional token from the Chaos Bag without returning any of the previous tokens that you drew, press the CTRL plus Shift plus X hotkey. For example, I draw a -1 from the Chaos Bag, but I need to draw another token. I press CTRL plus Shift plus X, and I draw a -3. To seal a token from the Chaos Bag, drag and drop the token on the virtual tabletop, right-click on the token, and then select Seal Token from the table menu. There is no hotkey for this command. For example, if I would like to seal the Elder Sign token, I right-click on the token, select Seal Token, and the token will be grayed out. That indicates the token has been sealed on the virtual tabletop, and it will not be drawn from the Chaos Bag if I click the bag icon or the CTRL S hotkey. To unseal a token, simply drag and drop it back into the Chaos Bag window under the Global tab, like so. To add Bless and or Curse tokens to the Chaos Bag, press the CTRL 1 or CTRL 2 hotkeys respectively. For example, if I press CTRL 1, I add 1 Bless token to the Chaos Bag. If I press CTRL 2, I add a Curse token to the Chaos Bag. The bag icon will display the number of Bless and or Curse tokens currently in the bag. It's important to note that, unlike other Chaos tokens, Bless and Curse tokens do not return to the Chaos Bag after you draw them. After you draw a Bless and or Curse token, you must delete it manually, either by double-clicking on the token or deleting it. For example, I have drawn a Bless token. If I click the bag again, that Bless token will remain on the table. If I double-click on the token, it will disappear. You may also mouse over the token and press delete. Likewise, if an ability instructs you to return a Bless or Curse token to the Chaos Bag after you draw it, you will need to press CTRL 1 or CTRL 2 respectively. To add a card to the virtual tabletop, press the CTRL A hotkey. This can be very helpful if you need to add additional tokens to the chaos bag in the middle of a scenario, or you built your deck in a hurry and forgot to include an important card, such as a story card. Type the name of the card that you need into the filter, select the card and the quantity that you need, click Create, and the cards will appear on the virtual tabletop. For example, I have forgotten to include the Lita Chandler card in my Roland Banks deck. I click on the virtual tabletop, click Add Card. In the filter, I type Lita, and the Lita Chandler card will appear. I select it. Under Quantity, I want 1, and I click Create, and the Lita Chandler card will appear on the virtual tabletop. If you delete the cards that you have added, they will go into your Investigator deck's discard pile. If you make a mistake and create a card that you don't need and you don't want it in your discard pile, simply drag and drop it into another window, such as the secondary deck window. Saving tools, which enable you to save the table state or load table state, are also located under the table menu. These tools are very helpful if you can't finish a game. They are also a good way to save complicated scenarios, such as In Too Deep from the Innsmouth Conspiracy Cycle. Simply load the pre-built encounter deck and set up the scenario. Once you've finished setting up the scenario, but before you load your Investigator deck, click Save Table State. The next time you want to play the scenario, simply load that table state, then load the Investigator deck that you want to play. The table menu also features the controls for the Tarot deck added in the Return to the Circle Undone expansion. The menu gives you the option to draw a single tarot card or perform the Chaos, Balance, or Choice card readings outlined in the Return to the Circle Undone rules insert. For example, I right-click on the virtual tabletop, scroll down to Tarot deck, select 3-card reading choice, and the cards will appear on the virtual tabletop. In this case, the Star, the Hierophant, and Death. There are several other tools located under the table menu that you may find helpful, although I don't use them very often. If you are playing multiplayer and you would like to target another card on the table, left-click on the card while holding down the Shift key. For example, I'm going to target the Roland Banks Investigator card. Double-tap on the card while holding down the Shift key, and you can drag an arrow from that card to another card on the table, like so. Targeting a card has no impact on gameplay. It's simply a handy way to communicate with another player if you don't happen to be using voice chat. You may clear all targets by hitting the Escape key, like so. Random allows you to flip a coin, pick a random number, or choose a random player, while Create Note lets you create a note on the table. For example, I right-click on the virtual tabletop, scroll down to Create Note, and a note will appear on the virtual tabletop. If you select the right-hand corner of the note, you can expand the note as you wish. To leave yourself a message in the note, simply type text in the note frame. For example, this is a tutorial about using OCTGN. You may drag the note around the table using the gray bar at the top of the note. If you wish to delete the note, simply hit the X. Finally, path markers allow you to create path markers to show how scenario locations are connected. For example, if I right-click on the virtual tabletop, scroll down to Path Markers, and choose Short Path, I will create a short path marker that I can use to connect two locations. For example, if I want to connect Rivertown to the graveyard, I simply select those two locations, and I drag the short path marker between them to indicate that they are connected. I've never bothered using the path markers because they seem like they're more trouble than they're worth, but you may find them useful if you have trouble remembering how certain locations are connected. Right-clicking on a card on the virtual tabletop brings up the card menu, which enables you to add or remove tokens from a card, change its orientation, or move it to another location. I prefer to use hotkeys for most of these commands. To add or remove a resource from a card, press F1 or Shift F1. To add or remove a clue, press F2 or Shift F2. To add or remove a damage token, press F3 or Shift F3. To add or remove a horror token, press F4 or Shift F4. To add or remove a doom token, press F5 or Shift F5. To add or remove a generic green counter, which I use to track my investigator's actions, press F6 or Shift F6. Note that you may also drag and drop tokens between cards or remove tokens by double-clicking on them and dragging them off the card. For example, if I want to spend resources on the Roland Banks Investigator card, I may simply drag and drop them off the card like so. Roland had 5 resources, and now he has 2. You may also edit the number of tokens on a card by highlighting the value and entering a new value into the field. Pressing F7 will exhaust or ready a card, while pressing CTRL F will flip that card over. For example, if I need to exhaust the Acolyte, I simply press F7, and F7 will ready it again. If I need to flip it over, I can press CTRL F. To add a card to the victory display, which is located under the Global tab, press the CTRL V hotkey. To advance the Agenda or Act deck, simply delete the Agenda or Act card displayed in the area reserved for encounter cards, and the next Agenda or Act card in the Agenda or Act deck window will take its place. For example, if I want to advance to Agenda 2A in the Midnight Masks, I can simply mouse over Agenda 1A, hit delete, and it will be replaced by Agenda 2A. Time is running short. Double-clicking on the Agenda or Act card in the window under the Global tab will also move it to the spot reserved for it on the virtual tabletop. For example, I need to replace Agenda 1A with Agenda 2A, so I simply mouse over Agenda 2A under the Global tab, double-click it, and it will move up to the area reserved for encounter cards. This can be very helpful if you need to keep the previous Agenda or Act card on the table for some reason. To lock a card, press the CTRL K hotkey. The lock is symbolized by a small lock icon that will appear on the card. If you lock your Investigator card, Octagon will not add a resource token to it when you press F12 to advance to the upkeep phase. If you lock the Agenda card displayed in the area reserved for encounter cards, Octagon will not add a Doom token to it when you press F12 to advance to the Mythos phase. This can be helpful during scenarios that change up how Doom is added, such as Echoes of the Past from the Path to Carcosa cycle. To remove a lock, simply press CTRL K again. You may also highlight a card using various colors. This can be helpful if you want to remember Lola Hayes' current role or to mark a card with a particular ability or trigger. For example, I right-click on Roland Banks, scroll down to Highlight, and I can highlight him with a blue highlight. The Move To command lets you move a card to a particular hand, deck, or discard pile. If you need to move the card to the bottom of that deck or pile, you can do that too. Finally, you can move a card to the front or send a card to the back using the Bring to Front or Send to Back commands respectively. Clicking Anchor will lock a card in place on the virtual tabletop. That brings us to the menus for the various windows under the Player and Global tabs. You can bring up these menus by right-clicking on the window. Most of the commands in these menus are similar, so I'll focus on the commands in the Hand and Deck menus. Right-clicking on the window reserved for your hand brings up the Hand menu. There are 3 commands of note: Random Discard, Mulligan, and Draw Basic Weakness. Neither of these commands have hotkeys. Selecting Random Discard will discard a card from your hand at random. For example, if I right-click on my hand in the Roland Banks deck and hit Random Discard, I have randomly discarded the Guard Dog. Selecting Mulligan brings up a window where you may select cards that you wish to mulligan. For example, if I'm unhappy with Roland Banks' hand, I may right-click on the window, click Mulligan, and it will bring up a window where I may select the cards I wish to mulligan, in this case, First Aid. And I click Select, and the card is mulliganed and replaced by a Hyper Awareness. I haven't gotten into the habit of using the mulligan feature. Instead, I drag the cards that I want to mulligan onto the virtual tabletop, draw cards from my deck to replace them, and then shuffle the cards on the virtual tabletop back into my draw deck. If you forgot to add a basic weakness to your deck, or a scenario forces you to add another basic weakness to your deck, you may select Draw Basic Weakness. You'll be prompted to specify whether to draw a basic weakness from all basic weaknesses in the game or just the core set. The basic weaknesses will automatically load into the Basic Weaknesses window under the Player tab, and then Octagon will draw one for you. The basic weaknesses appear in your hand if you selected Draw Basic Weakness from the Hand window, or your draw deck if you selected Draw Basic Weakness from the Deck menu. For example, I have forgotten to draw a basic weakness for my Roland Banks deck. I right-click on the hand window, select Draw Basic Weakness, and I draw Drawing the Sign from the Path to Carcosa. If you are playing the Arkham Horror LCG two-handed, you may change the visibility setting for your hand under the Hand menu. Right-clicking on any deck gives you the option to pass control of that deck to another player, which we discussed in part 3 of this tutorial. The commands to shuffle your deck, draw cards, or discard cards are located under the Deck menu. The hotkey to draw a card from your deck is CTRL D. The hotkey to draw more than one card is CTRL SHIFT D. OCTGN will prompt you to specify how many cards you wish to draw. For example, if Roland Banks wants to draw a card from his deck, I can click CTRL D and I draw the Old Book of Lore. The Deck menu includes a command to discard many cards, although there is no hotkey. If you are pressing the F12 hotkey to advance through the phases of the game, OCTGN will automatically draw a card from your deck when you advance to the upkeep phase. To prevent this, you may lock the draw deck under the Deck menu. When you do this, a small lock icon will appear on the deck. To remove the lock, simply right-click on the deck and select Lock Unlock Deck. Finally, all deck menus include commands to shuffle the deck or look at a card in the deck. You may look at the top X cards, all cards, or the bottom X cards, if necessary. The discard pile menu has one command of note, Shuffle All into Deck, which you will need to use if you draw through your Investigator deck. OCTGN does not do this automatically for you. The Basic Weakness menu contains one command of note, Load Deck. Much like the Basic Weakness command in the Hand and Deck menus, Load Deck will prompt you to specify whether to load all basic weaknesses in the game or just the basic weaknesses from the core set. Once you've made your selection, the basic weaknesses will appear in the Basic Weakness window under the Player tab. You may shuffle or look through the deck using the commands I discussed earlier. The menus for the windows under the Global tab have many of the same commands as those under the Player tab. It's worth noting that the menus for the Special Encounter deck and Second Special Encounter deck have several unique commands. Move all to Encounter deck and shuffle, move all to Encounter deck top, move all to Encounter deck bottom, and swap with Encounter deck. These commands are very helpful in scenarios like the House Always Wins from the Dunwich Legacy expansion, which adds additional encounter sets to the encounter deck in the middle of a scenario. That's going to do it for my tutorial about playing the Arkham Horror LCG on the OCTGN Virtual Tabletop. If you have any questions, please leave a comment down below or drop me a line at manfromling@gmail.com and I'd be happy to help. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content. Your support helps out the channel a great deal. That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoyed what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromling@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromling. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.